Welcome to Literati, the beach and beyond. I am so thrilled today because I am talking to one of my own favorite writers, Celeste Ng. Our April pick is Everything I Never Told You, which was Celeste's first novel. So today we are going to talk to Celeste about this book and about other books and about all kinds of interesting topics. And for those of you that tuned in at 12:30, I'm sorry, I personally had technical difficulties. Hi, Celeste.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that you can hear me now. I can hear you. We're all good.
We are all good. And thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Are you in Cambridge?
I am. This is my office in Cambridge. This is my nice Zoom background. My actual messy desk is over there. But yeah, right. This is where I do all my writing. So
okay, I absolutely love that. So you and I have never met in person, but we have been on Twitter and all kinds of different text streams, whatever. I reached out to you after I first read Everything I Never Told You, which came out, I'm sorry, what year did this
2014. So it was I realized that I sold it just about 10 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. That is amazing. So 2014, and I loved it so much. And I think I told you on Twitter. And so I want to talk about, because it was your first novel, that's correct, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got the idea for the story, and B, how you ended up getting published for the first time?
Yeah, I guess that second part of your question reminds me that I should say it's my first novel that got published.
Okay.
I had written other attempts at novels. I'd written lots of things, as I think most writers do, right? Anything that looks like it's a huge success instantly, probably was 10 years in the making. But I got the idea for this when I was in grad school. I was writing a short story and it kept kind of getting longer and longer. It couldn't kind of fit itself into a short story size. And I realized that it might be a novel. There might be so much that I had to explore that I had to take a bigger form. The very initial part of the story came from a story that my husband told me about a friend of his from elementary school way back, that when this friend was, I think, like 7 or so, he pushed his own little sister into the pond that was in the back of their house. And she was fine. Their parents took her out. He was in trouble. As far as I know, they both have grown up and become very nice people. Like they're totally fine. But something about this story caught my imagination. I kept thinking, why would someone push their sister into a lake? And then why did they pull her back? No, of course, why did they pull her back? Like, how did that change their relationship with each other? Did that have any effect on how they related to each other when they got older? And that's where the story started. And of course, it became something quite different from there. But that little seed of the real life story is what got me thinking about really sibling relationships and then family dynamics. And then to the second part of the question, how I ended up getting published, it's the kind of long, slow, boring story that I wish there was a better story, but I worked on this book for a long time. It took about 6 years to write. It went through 4 major drafts and something really big changed in each one. And for a long time, I really was not sure anybody would want to read it, let alone publish it. I just wasn't, I wasn't sure that it was a story that would speak to anyone else. And so once I'd worked on it for a very long time, which took a lot of temp jobs, I had a baby in the middle, many things happened. I finally got to the point where I felt like, oh, this is why I was writing the story. These are the things that I was interested in that pulled me in. And I was fortunate to find an agent and a publisher who read the story and it resonated with them, and it kind of went from there. I've been really grateful for that.
Right. I mean, that is an amazing, on the one hand, it's sort of quasi everybody's story, but on the other hand, it's so amazing. Like, you worked on it for so long, you never gave up. For those of you watching who have children, Celeste had a baby in the middle of it. And that's where I feel like a lot of people who aren't very serious about their writing get derailed, right?
Yeah.
Life takes over, you have a book, and then you just don't make it a priority. So one of the things that I'm assuming happened is you really made this book your priority.
I did. And I think that's such a good point, because I think it's really important for, for people who are interested in writing, but also in anything that they're doing, that if you can, whatever space you can carve out to keep that thing alive and, give as much time as you can to it, I think it often is the difference between succeeding in it or not. So I tried to make this book a priority. There was a point where I had a freelance job, and my husband and I did some math. I was lucky to have a partner who was, supported me emotionally, and then we managed to make the, the money that we had go. And I was like, I have this long in which to finish this book, and if I don't, this might not work, but we can only make it for this long. And I was fortunate that I was able to kind of get it together in that period of time.
Right. That is amazing. Now, when you said you started it in graduate school, were you in graduate school for writing, or do you have another degree? I can't remember.
No, so I was in grad school for writing. I went to get a Master of Fine Arts at the University of Michigan,
Okay.
and I finished in 2006. So I was really lucky in that I got into this program that offered you funding. And so basically it was essentially a scholarship. It was like, come and work for 2 years, and I taught, but I had time in which writing could be my main pursuit. And I think that was a huge benefit to me to be able to do that.
Right. And that was at Michigan or after you graduated from Michigan?
I was at Michigan.
Right.
Everybody who got into the program there got fully funded, which was an amazing opportunity. And it was in the last semester that I was there that I started working on this book. The very, very early form of the first 2 chapters of the book, which are completely different now, were in my my master's thesis that I turned in to graduate.
Gotcha. Okay. So I went to Iowa right around the same time. I was there 2006 to 2008.
Yeah.
Iowa was the same. Everybody got money. Everybody taught. And so it sounded, I mean, it really was. We basically had no requirements. We went to workshop, but we didn't really have to do much else.
Yeah.
And
It's a sort of like magical period, kind of.
I wish I could go back to those days. I mean, especially like, I graduated from Iowa. I did find an agent in my very last workshop. But I mean, then, you have to work to make money. And so it was really nice to have that time. Okay. So I want to get into the story a little bit. Can you talk to me about the genesis of this family and also your choice to set it in Ohio? You're from Ohio?
I am from Ohio. And that was actually honestly part of why I decided to set it in Ohio, is that it felt like a landscape that I knew. And as a beginning writer, I felt like there was so much that I didn't know that I was like, I just need to set it in a place that I sort of know. So I made up a town so that I could have a little bit of imaginative flexibility. But I wanted to write about this story about a family that was Asian American in a place where there weren't very any Asian Americans.
Right.
So at the time that the book takes place in the 1970s, and then earlier also in the 1950s and 60s, there were really very few Asians in Northeast Ohio. I mean, there's still not that many, but at the time it would have been very, very few. And a lot of that came from my own experience of growing up in a Chinese American family. My parents are both immigrants from Hong Kong. My sister and I were born here. And of feeling like we are visually different from all the people around us, right? Class photographs from grade school, there is, we stand out. And I wanted to kind of explore that experience because it was such a formative thing for me to see what it might feel like for some of these characters to grapple with that and figure out how they fit in and where they fit in.
Yeah, I mean, it was so effectively done. And I reminisce because I grew up outside Philadelphia. So kind of the same suburban, definitely like a small suburban town. My best friend growing up was Korean, Gina Kim. And I was at her house nonstop. And so I basically became an honorary Korean person and would go, like, she went to church all day long on Sunday and everybody was Korean and I would go with her and I would be the only white person there. And I didn't have, obviously, like, you don't have the perspective on it as a kid. I just thought it was cool and I loved the food and I like made friends there. But she and I were so close, but we never really, like, in 2022, if it was happening, we may have addressed like the racial and ethnic differences, but we just didn't. But for that reason, like, I wish I could go back. I'm no longer in touch with her, but I wish I could go back and ask her, like, did you have feelings like this of feeling isolated? Because we were so.
Yeah. And I feel like it's kind of amazing that you had that experience, because I feel like it's a thing that you often have if you are a racial minority or some other kind of minority, and you don't always have it in other circumstances. So my husband is a tall white guy. And I remember like, in our 20s, we went to Hong Kong to visit some of my family that lived there. And we were in the subway. It was extremely crowded. And when he got out of the subway, he was like, I've never had that experience where I am like the only white person. And he was like a head taller than everybody else. And he was like, everyone was looking at me. And he knew consciously sort of what that experience might be like, but he hadn't really felt it until then, right? And it's often the case that unless you've been in that situation in some way, you don't know what it's like to be the only one, the only whatever in the room. But I think you're right. Like at that time, and even up until fairly recently, these weren't things that people talked about, right? You didn't, it was actually considered to be the more sort of open-minded and progressive thing to not talk about it and pretend that race didn't exist at all and that it was just something we were just not going to mention, right? It was like almost impolite. And that's a big shift that I feel like has happened from that time period into this time period of feeling like this is a thing that we can maybe engage with and talk about. And part of what the book is, I think, is trying to grapple with what happens when you don't talk about those things. People make assumptions when you don't tell each other things, right? Hence the title of the book.
Right. It was totally fascinating. Okay, I want to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of the book. So everybody has drama except for our youngest character, who actually was the one that stole my heart. But so Nath and Lydia and then Marilyn and James, like they all are hiding something. And it really ends up blowing up in everybody's face. I mean, the hook at the beginning is so good, right? Because we have a child that's missing, and then soon into the book we find out that she's dead. And so everybody is immediately vested. So on the one hand, I mean, it's honestly like almost the greatest way to start a novel, because somebody's dead, somebody that you care about. And then we go in, the novel isn't really about it's about what happened to her, but it's not about, is she dead or alive? It's about how did this happen?
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly why I ended up starting it off that way. In every conception of the book, every draft, Lydia was always dead. And that was true from the beginning of the book. But in the very first drafts of the book, I didn't let the reader know that at the beginning. There would be, 20 to 50 pages where the family was looking for her and they didn't know what had happened. And it wasn't until the last draft of the book where one of my friends who read the book said, she's like, why are you hiding this? She's like, maybe you need to tell people early because it's making people wonder, is she alive or is she not alive? And the real question is exactly what you said. It's not, is she alive or is she dead? But what happened? How did we get here? Right. And I was like, she's right. I should put that up front because in a sense that tells you immediately that's not the question. Don't go down that road. That's just a red herring, right? Of is she alive or not? The question is really, how did we end up in this place?
Right. Yeah. Classic storytelling. Classic. Do you want to talk a little bit about, everybody who's watching this has read the book. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Marilyn Lydia dynamic? Someone in my app, so Literati has an app, and someone asked, like, why isn't Nate the favorite child? Like, he's going to Harvard, he's the firstborn, and why is it Lydia? And I feel like, the obvious answer is that Marilyn 100% felt like her life was stopped and thwarted because she's the woman, because she was the wife, because she was the mother. And so it was very important that she vest her dreams not in Nate's. He's going to be fine either way, she perceives, because he's a boy, but in Lydia.
Yeah, I suspect that's true. One of the things that I ended up thinking about while writing was this idea of having a favorite child. I'm really grateful that my mom, as far as I know, if she has a favorite, my sister and I literally do not know who it is. She has always been very fair. But I know families, where it's very clear who the favorite is, and you don't always know why, right? You're like, I would not have expected that. And so part of it is that weird idea of like why parents get invested in one particular child over another. Sometimes it's because you're really similar, sometimes because you're really different. Right. In this case, I think for Marilyn, probably some of it, like you said, has to do with the feeling that part of the reason that she is where she is because she is a woman, right? And a woman at this particular time. And I've seen that happen in parents that I know where they're like, I'm a woman, you will become a woman. I kind of imprint on you in a way, right? Like you're the one who we have an understanding, right? It doesn't always happen that way, but for Marilyn, I feel like it is this idea of like, I'm going to live through my daughter, because the daughter is the one that she feels is like me, right? And that's part of the problem. That idea you're going to be like me, but of course she's actually her own person.
Right, exactly. And of course, now in 2022, when we're parenting, we're like hyper aware, like, am I pushing my dreams off on my kids?
Yeah.
That is now a big parenting no.
It is. And at the same time, and I feel this as a parent myself, even when you're hyper aware of it, it's really hard to avoid doing that, right? Like you have ideas and expectations of your child, and it's hard to know, like, is this my idea or is this your idea? Like, you really love piano, so I signed you up for this recital, but maybe I'm pushing you, but I think you like it, but I don't know, right? It's a hard
Right.
thing to do. And I think, you do the best you can, but there's always going to be a moment where you're like, is this my dream or are you liking it because you want to please me? Right.
Right.
It's so
Exactly.
hard to disentangle.
So I have two like finer plot points to discuss, and then we're going to move on because I want to talk to you about something else. The first is Marilyn leaves the family.
Yeah.
Okay. And my readers in my book group had a very difficult time with this decision.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, did I have a difficult time with it? Kind of. Only because, and I know you understand what I'm saying. Like, as a mother, like, you want control. Like, you want control. Like, your natural instinct is just to like be there for the kids.
Yeah.
You want to control. And so it would be so difficult to leave. So can you talk about the decision to put that in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of your readers were not alone. I think that a lot of readers really had a very strong reaction towards this, and for a lot of them, it was really hard to think about. And for me, it was hard to write.
Yeah.
I'm at the point where I am a mother and a daughter now, right? My mother is still alive, and I think about what would my life have been like if she'd taken off, right? I mean, she would go away on a business trip, and I would know exactly when she was coming back, and those 3 days I'd be like, oh my God, how do I get along without my mom? Right. So the idea that of a parent leaving her child indefinitely without an explanation was really hard for me to think about as a daughter. And then now that I'm a mother, I'm also like, oh, I don't, dropping him off at daycare for the first time was really hard, right? The sense that I don't know what's going to happen to him. I can't be there to keep him safe and all of that, right? So I feel like there's a really strong societal impulse that we're like, you don't leave your children, and especially not if you're the mother, right? We have a little bit of it's different for fathers. We have a long standing sort of understanding of like, well, sometimes fathers leave the family and that happens, but for the mother to leave the family, it's really shocking. And so I think the question, that I kept asking myself is, what would be a strong enough force to make a mother feel like that was the right choice, right? Without making any judgments about whether it was or wasn't. Why would she think this was something that she had to do or that she needed to do? And a lot of readers are still like, nope, I can't forgive it. That was bad mothering. And I see their point of view. It was interesting to me to go on book tour. The number of people, I was really shocked, the number of people who came to me and said, my mother left the family for a while. And I kind of didn't realize that. Is it like multiple people, like many, not every reading, but I would say maybe every other or every third reading, they would say to me, yeah, there was a period where I think I knew my parents didn't get along, but then like my mom just wasn't there for like a month. And then she came back and we never talked about it. And I was really struck by that. Because yeah, I certainly, I knew this was a sort of thing that happened, but it was really, it was really powerful to hear from people where they were like, yeah, only as an adult do I start thinking about how complicated that was for everybody involved.
Right. And I almost wonder if it wasn't like generational, because it's very true. I grew up with this single mom and she was very independent, but there was a whole, of course, other people's mothers who didn't work and maybe their dreams had been. And it was in that sort of 60s, 70s, like coming of age in that era. And like, is women's lib real, or are we, or like it could be real if we weren't constrained, and
Right.
it's different.
It's like you said, it's so much of it has to do with the time period, and that's why the book is set at the period it is, because I think there was this generation of women who, like you said, it's sort of like before that, there weren't really other opportunities for them. After that, the next generation was going to get more opportunities, right? Like Lydia's generation, it's not unthinkable for you to become a doctor. It's not unthinkable for you to be divorced. But for this one generation, which is Marilyn's generation, they kind of see what's going to be available, but they're told you can't have it. Right. And that, I think, is a really heartbreaking position to be in. And, now we still have a strong reaction to mothers leaving their families, but there is more space, I think, I hope anyway, for women in a relationship to say, I need these things. I want these things. I want to have this career. I want to balance aspects of my personality. Whereas before that, there wasn't. It was sort of like a take it or leave it package. And, the sense that you either bought into the whole package of being a housewife and raising your children and not having a career, not having any interest, not having any agency, not having your own checking account, right? Like all those things that women couldn't do up until pretty recently. Or if you didn't want some part of that, your only choice was to chuck the whole thing.
Right.
And what an amazingly difficult position that would have been for those women, right?
Right. Beautifully illustrated here. So while she's away, Marilyn discovers she's pregnant, and back to the family she goes.
Yeah.
And in the book, one of the other things the readers reacted to is poor Hannah, right? So poor Hannah is basically ignored. I kept being like, this poor child. And are we to read that it's because at least for Marilyn, she was the, like the downer.
Yeah. I mean, maybe again. Yeah. I mean, again, some of this is going to be sort of, all of us, I think, are going to armchair psychoanalyze the characters as we should in a book. Part of it might have to do with the fact of the circumstances of her birth, that she, she's going to be a reminder for Marilyn of all the stuff that she had to give up, more even than the other two, right? And then part of it too might have to do with personality. Hannah has a special place in my heart because I think she's a lot like me in some ways, and she's a youngest. I'm a youngest. But Hannah also is the one who notices things and pays attention, and then just says what other people are maybe holding back. And for Marilyn, whose whole life has been built, and has had to be built around holding stuff in, you can kind of see how those two might just never see eye to eye, right? And, how a parent with a child who's just like, I don't get you. Like, where did you come from? Like, how are we related to each other? How that might be a space where they can't see each other. Whereas with Lydia, she at least perceives that, oh, we've got so much in common. You also love these things, and so do I, right? We have this in common. Again, it's so interesting to me to see how these family dynamics sort of form themselves, and the stories that people make about their own families. Like, I think most families that I know, mine included, there's a narrative of like, who's the smart one, or who's the sensible one? Who is the one who you definitely call if you need something taken care of immediately? And who is the one who you maybe let's keep an eye on them and check up on them periodically, right? Oh, and they're not necessarily negative things, but the idea that you get kind of fossilized in your family relationships, right? And it could be 40 years later, right? You could all be grown, you could have your own children, you're all back at, a parent's house, and something happens and you snap back into those family relationships where one of you is the screw up, one of you is the golden child, one of you is the weirdo rebel, right? Whatever your roles are, it's so hard to break out of those. Yeah. And I think at some point, probably before Hannah was even aware of it, she got solidified into the role of being like kind of nobody's favorite, right? Which is so heartbreaking, because she kind of can see everybody better than they can see themselves, and that might have something to do with it too, right? That's uncomfortable for people.
In some sense, she's the omniscient, right? She's the one, because she's watching everything and observing.
Yeah, in some ways she's able to do that because no one's paying attention to her.
And no one's paying attention to her.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to switch gears. We've got about 5 minutes left. So everyone I'm assuming 99% of the people that are watching this have already read your second novel, which was Little Fires Everywhere. Massive favorite of mine and of like everybody across the country. I wanted to talk about the TV adaptation because, first of all, if you haven't out there read Little Fires Everywhere, what is wrong with you? You must read it first. Very complex book. And I was thinking about it this morning because I knew I was going to be talking to you. Such a complex book. And the title is, as I'm like sitting there thinking about it, I'm like, the title is so perfect because I don't know about little, but there are fires everywhere in that book. Like everybody has something going on. And it's almost like there are two sort of major plot lines that sort of run together. And I thought the television show did such an amazing job of being true to the book, but I wanted to hear what your thoughts were.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I think they did an amazing job. I was so lucky to have gotten to work with such an amazing team. Liz Tigelaar, who's the showrunner, I feel like wrote, amazing scripts. The whole writer's room did a great job, I think, of sticking true to the core of the book, and in the plot of the book, and yet making it its own thing, which I feel like is the tricky thing with an adaptation, right? Like you don't necessarily want it to be a beat for beat reproduction. You want it to be similar, but you also want it's TV, right? So it needs to move differently than a book does, right? The analogy I kept coming back to is it's sort of like a cover song. Like you want to hear the familiar melody, you want to hear the same words, but you want them to put their own spin on it, right? Like you want it to be its own thing. And I loved what they did. I feel like because it was TV, because they had the two amazing actresses that they had, Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington, because they had an amazingly diverse group of writers who had lots of different life experiences, and different perspectives, they were able to tease out other aspects of the book that I couldn't in the book, and yet still stay true to what the book was. It was really an amazing experience. I'm so happy with what they did.
Oh my gosh, I was so impressed because I thought, that if any book is like just right, just to be not necessarily ruined, but not true to the novel. But I felt like the show was so, like, the way they handled the different threads and you were engaged with all of them. And I was especially taken, and now I'm forgetting the name of the youngest daughter.
Izzy. Yeah.
Oh my God. That story in the show in particular was such a winner and so dramatic and so heartbreaking.
Yeah, and that's one of the sort of the big changes in it, so not to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it. If you haven't seen it, it's on Hulu, highly recommend it. But it's a place where I think, again, they took some of what was in the book and they built on it in a way that I think was really productive and really fun too, and was able to take the book sort of a step farther in a different direction than I could, because the TV show is 8 hours long, right? You have the space to give all the characters some more screen time and to see them, and that's one of the fun things about the TV show is they could build each of those characters and give each of those characters sort of their own speaking space, in ways that books can't always do.
No, I agree. And so you can be very proud of that. We're going to cut us off in 2 minutes. I want to ask you about your new, I see you have a new book coming out.
Thank you. I do. This is one of the first times that I've started to talk about it, so I have to practice. It's called Our Missing Hearts. It's coming out on October 4th of this year, 2022, and it'll have some similarities for readers of my earlier books. Deals with a lot of family relations, especially parents and children. It's about a 12-year-old boy named Bird, and he gets a mysterious letter from his long-lost mother. She's left the family some years ago, and he's not totally sure why. And this letter draws him into this quest to try and go and find her and find out what happened and understand why she left the family, but also hopefully reconnect with her. So it's been in the works for a long time, but I wrote most of it during the pandemic. And so it's kind of a special book to me in that grappling with a lot of, it doesn't take place in a pandemic, but I'm grappling with a lot of the questions that I think the pandemic has raised for us. Like, how do you parent in a time when it feels like the world is falling apart, right?
Right.
What do you try to do with your kids? How do you prepare them for a world like this? And then how do you still stay connected with other people when it feels like the world is just breaking into smaller and smaller pieces as you go?
Right. That sounds so amazing. October 4th, everyone. It's called Our
Missing Hearts.
Our Missing Hearts.
Yeah.
Awesome. Celeste, thank you so much. Everything I Never Told You. our April book pick with Celeste Ng. You're the best, Celeste. Thank you. And thank you for everybody out there who was so patient with our
technical issues. Ellen, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Literati.